My wife cheated on me with her boss, and now she's claiming half of our $750, $0 estate, despite secretly selling our family home for $500, $0 to fund her affair and hide the evidence. And I just found out she's been manipulating the lawyers over a suspicious $200, $0 loan I didn't even know existed. I never saw it coming. Honestly, I thought I knew my wife, Lisa, inside and out. We'd been together for over a decade, built a pretty comfortable life, 2 kids, a nice house, a decent business that I ran. I worked hard, she played the part of the perfect wife, and everything seemed fine on the surface. But then, out of nowhere, everything shattered. It all started with small things. Lisa becoming more secretive with her phone, staying late at work more often than she used to. She'd lie about where she was, say she was catching up on paperwork or meeting with clients. She'd get defensive if I asked to see her phone or question her whereabouts. My gut told me something was off, but I brushed it aside, convinced I was just overthinking it. We had our issues, sure, but nothing that pointed. This kind of betrayal. One day I decided to check her email, something I never do, but I was feeling paranoid. I wanted to see if she was hiding anything. That's when I found the messages. Not just flirtatious texts, but full-on conversations with her boss, Mark, that went way beyond professional. They were talking about secret meetups, plans to see each other outside of work, and even explicit talks about sex. I was stunned. My stomach sank. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I spent the next few days obsessively digging, going through her phone, her computer, trying to piece together how long this had been going on. It turns out she'd been sneaking around for months. She'd meet him late at night, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at her office after hours. She'd lie about her whereabouts, tell me she was working late, then go off to see her lover. The worst part, she'd convinced herself she was in love with Mark, that it was just about passion, that it didn't mean anything. I confronted her when I was ready. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sat her down, told her I knew everything. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she started spinning her web of lies. She said I was overreacting, that I was jealous and insecure. She claimed Mark was just a business acquaintance, and that I was paranoid. She even had the nerve to tell me I was imagining things, that I was just jealous of her success and her happiness. She insisted she loved me, that it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But I could see the truth in her eyes. It was more than that. She was cold, manipulative, and completely dismissive of what she'd done. The emotional hit was brutal. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. How could she lie so effortlessly? How could she cheat on me with her boss, a man who was supposed to be just a professional acquaintance? And yet, she had the nerve to act like I was the crazy one. That's when I started noticing the financial signs, too, small things at first. She'd been acting secretive about money, hiding receipts, and suddenly, our joint accounts had strange transfers. I didn't pay much attention at first, but now I see it was all part of her plan. She'd secretly sold our family home for $500, $0 to fund her affair, to hide the evidence. I found out about it when I stumbled across a transfer receipt from the real estate agent. She told me she was upgrading the house, but she was actually cashing out the equity and moving the money into her own accounts. She's always been good at lying, but I felt sick reading that. And then came the real shocker. I discovered she'd taken out a suspicious loan of $200, $0, money I didn't even know existed, under a different name, without my knowledge or consent. She'd been manipulating the lawyers, steering the legal proceedings to her advantage, claiming she was entitled to half of everything, including the estate I'd worked so hard to build. I was furious. How could she do this? How could she betray me and then try to take what's mine? That's where I am now. Sitting in this mess, trying to piece everything together, knowing that I'm facing not just a broken marriage but a war over money, trust, and my dignity. I don't know what's worse, the fact that she cheated or that she's trying to take everything I've built. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am, trying to figure out my next move while she's busy spinning her web of lies. After I found out about the sale of the house and the secret loan, everything changed. I started digging deeper, and what I uncovered made my blood boil. Lisa had been manipulating the legal process from the start. She hired her own lawyers behind my back, and I only found out because I accidentally came across some email threads she forgot to delete. The woman was always a bitch about control, but now she was wielding it over my life, over my money, and over the future I thought I was building with her. The first thing I saw was her lawyer's email, which detailed how she was pushing for a settlement that would give her half of the estate, despite the fact that she secretly sold our family home for $500,000, cash, to fund her affair. I couldn't believe it. She'd lied to my face, told me she was upgrading the house, and in reality she'd cashed out everything. That house was supposed to be our family's legacy, something I worked my ass off for. Now she'd sold it behind my back and used the money to keep her affair alive. And then I found the email chain about the loan. It was a suspicious loan for $200, $0, taken out under her name, but with no proper documentation or approval from me. She managed to manipulate the lawyers into including it as part of her claim on the estate. The worst part, it was under a shell company she set up, so I couldn't trace it easily. I started to put the pieces together. She'd been planning this for months, selling assets, manipulating the legal system, hiding money, while I was busy running our business and trying to keep everything afloat. I confronted her that night. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her I knew everything about her affair, the house sale, the loan, the lies. Her reaction was classic Lisa. She got defensive, started calling me paranoid, accused me of not trusting her, and then threw a tantrum about how she deserves half of everything because she's been sacrificing for years. She told me I was overreacting, that I was just angry because I found out she'd been unfaithful. But I wasn't just angry, I was furious. I felt betrayed on every level. Not only had she cheated, but she'd been sneaking around with her boss, manipulating the legal system and trying to take everything I'd worked for. I felt like I was losing my mind. The woman I loved, the woman I married, was now a complete stranger. She was cold, calculating, and manipulative. She kept lying, spinning stories about how she never meant for things to get so out of hand, how it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. She insisted she loved me, that she was only doing this because she was unhappy, but I knew better. She'd been planning her escape, and I was just a pawn in her game. Emotionally, I was wrecked. I went from shock to anger to despair in a matter of days. I couldn't believe she'd betrayed me so completely. I kept replaying every moment, every sign I missed, every lie she told. I felt like a fool for trusting her for so long. But what hurt most was knowing she didn't care about the damage she'd caused. She only cared about protecting her own interests. Money-wise, I was starting to see how deep this rabbit hole went. She'd been draining our accounts, funneling money into secret accounts, and now she was trying to claim half of everything, despite the fact she'd already cashed out our family home and taken out the loan. I had to act fast, figure out how to stop her, and protect what was mine. I couldn't let her get away with this, not after everything we'd built. That night, I stayed up until dawn, poring over legal documents, bank statements, and emails. I knew I had to get legal advice, but I also knew I couldn't trust her lawyers anymore. They were her puppets. I needed someone on my side, someone who'd see through her manipulations. I started looking for a lawyer who specialized in divorce and estate disputes, someone who could help me fight her claim and uncover all her secrets. I also began to gather evidence, screenshots, bank statements, anything that could prove her dishonesty and financial deception. The hardest part was facing the reality that my marriage was over. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone cold and ruthless. I knew I had to be smart, ruthless even if I wanted to protect what was rightfully mine. I also realized I needed to prepare myself emotionally. This was going to be a long fight, and I had to stay strong, not just for myself but for my kids. They deserved stability, and I couldn't let her ruin everything we'd built. Now I was at a crossroads. Do I fight her legally, try to reconcile, or walk away? Honestly, I was leaning toward the fight. She crossed too many lines, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with my life's work and the money she'd secretly stolen. I was planning my next move, knowing that this was only the beginning of a war I didn't want but couldn't avoid. I just hope I can come out of this with what's left of my dignity and my future intact. The more I dug into her financial mess, the more I realized how deep her manipulations went. It wasn't just about the house or the loan. She'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. Every time I thought I understood her game, she'd surprise me with another lie or another sneaky move. I started to see that Lisa isn't just your typical gold digger or cheater. She's a master manipulator, someone who could spin a web so tight that I wouldn't see the truth until it was too late. I found out she had been secretly transferring money out of our joint accounts into other accounts under fake names. I traced some of the transactions, and it was clear she had been using those funds to cover her affair with Mark, paying for hotels, dinners, and even gifts. She always claimed she was just trying to make a better life, but I knew better. She was making sure she had enough to run away if she needed to. And she was doing it all while pretending everything was fine, even when I started asking questions. I remember the night I finally confronted her again. I had all the evidence laid out, bank statements, emails, receipts, and I told her I knew about the secret accounts and the illegal loan. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk, like she thought she was untouchable. She told me she was entitled to her share because she had sacrificed so much, raising the kids, managing the household, and supporting my career. She said she deserved half the estate because she was married to me, even though she'd been planning her escape behind my back. That's when I snapped. I told her she was full of shit, that her sacrifices meant nothing when she was out cheating and stealing from us. I told her I was done being manipulated, that I was going to fight her for every penny, every asset she tried to claim. She just laughed, that nasty little laugh she always does when she thinks she's winning. But I knew I had to stay calm, focus, and get my ducks in a row. In the days that followed, I hired a forensic accountant and a new lawyer, someone who specialized in marital disputes and financial fraud. They confirmed what I already suspected. Lisa had been draining our accounts, hiding assets, and planning her escape for months. The lawyer told me to prepare for a nasty battle, that she'd use every trick in the book to screw me over. But I was ready. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Meanwhile, I started noticing more strange things. She'd been secretly making calls on her phone, deleting messages, and even installing apps that hid her activity. I caught her once trying to wipe her phone clean, but I managed to recover some of the data. It was clear she was desperate to cover her tracks. The more I learned, the more I realized she was capable of anything. She was a liar, a manipulator, and now a thief. I also discovered that she'd been talking to her lawyer about a divorce settlement that would give her half of everything, despite her already selling the house and taking out the loan. She was trying to game the system, to turn the tables in her favor. I knew I had to fight back hard or I'd lose everything. I started documenting everything, her lies, her manipulations, her financial moves. I knew I couldn't trust her anymore, but I could trust the evidence I was gathering. Honestly, I felt like I was in a nightmare. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was nothing but a con artist. She'd lied to my face, cheated on me with her boss, and then tried to steal my future. The betrayal cut so deep I didn't know how to process it. I kept asking myself, how could she do this? How could someone I trusted so blindly turn into this manipulative, money-hungry monster? But I also knew I had to stay strong. If I was going to fight, I needed to be strategic. I couldn't let her manipulate the legal system anymore. I had to expose her lies, her secret accounts, her scheme to take everything. That's what I was working on now, building my case, gathering more proof, and preparing for the inevitable showdown. I just hoped I had enough to win. Because at this point, I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my dignity, my sanity, and whatever was left of the life I thought I had with Lisa. The legal battle was starting to take shape, and I quickly learned that Lisa was not going down without a fight. She had her lawyers spinning stories, trying to paint herself as the victim, claiming I was abusive and neglectful, anything to distract from her own lies and theft. But I had the evidence, and I was determined to use it all. I knew that if I didn't act fast, she'd manipulate the courts, twist the facts, and walk away with half of everything, including the money she'd secretly stolen. One day, I sat in my lawyer's office going over our strategy. We discussed how to expose her secret accounts, how to prove she'd been manipulating the legal process, and how to challenge her claims to the estate. My lawyer told me that her biggest weakness was her lies, her attempts to hide assets, her fake documents, her fake loan. We had to prove that she was intentionally trying to cheat me out of my rightful inheritance. I felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. Meanwhile, Lisa was busy trying to turn my own family and friends against me. She'd been spreading rumors, twisting facts, and claiming I was an unfit father and a terrible husband. I started to notice people I thought were allies pulling away, hesitant to get involved. I knew she was good at manipulation, but I also knew I had to stay grounded and keep my focus on the facts. I couldn't let her smear my name or distract me from what I needed to do. I also uncovered more of her secrets. She'd been secretly meeting with a real estate agent, trying to get an appraisal of the house, knowing she'd already sold it. She'd been planning her escape, trying to get the most out of the sale before I even knew what was happening. I found texts where she was telling her lawyer that she wanted to get everything she could and make sure he doesn't get a penny. That was the moment I realized she was not just a cheating wife. She was a full-blown con artist, willing to burn everything to get what she wanted. At this point, I knew I had to take control. I hired a private investigator to follow her, gather proof of her ongoing manipulations, and see if she was up to anything else. Sure enough, she was still meeting with her lawyer, still trying to hide assets and still trying to manipulate the legal process. It was clear she was desperate, cornered, and willing to do anything to win. The emotional toll was brutal. Every day, I woke up feeling betrayed, angry, and exhausted. I kept replaying every moment, every lie, every betrayal. I couldn't believe the woman I married was capable of this level of deception, but I also knew I had to focus. If I wanted to win this fight, I had to stay calm, collected, and relentless. I started documenting every interaction, every financial move, every lie she told. I was preparing for a long, nasty court battle, and I knew I had to be ready for anything. I also began to think about what I wanted in the end: justice, truth, and whatever was left of my dignity. I knew I might lose some money, but I wouldn't let her take everything I'd worked for. That became my mantra. In the meantime, I realized I couldn't trust her anymore, not even a little. She'd been lying to my face for months, manipulating the legal system and secretly planning her escape. All I could do now was gather enough evidence to expose her fully, so that when the time came, the courts would see through her lies. I was preparing for a war, one that I didn't want but knew I had to fight. And I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to come out on the other side with some semblance of justice and peace. The court date was set, and I knew this was the moment everything would come crashing down. I'd spent weeks gathering proof: bank statements, emails, texts, everything that proved Lisa's manipulations, her secret accounts, her lies about the loan, and her sale of the house. I worked with my lawyer tirelessly, making sure every piece of evidence was airtight. I couldn't afford any slip-ups. Lisa was a master at twisting the truth, and I knew she'd do everything to spin the court in her favor. On the day of the hearing, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. I sat in the courtroom, watching her sit across from me, her bitchy smirk in place as if she already won. She had her lawyers whispering in her ear, probably trying to figure out how to spin her lies even further. When the judge called the case, I took a deep breath and started laying out everything. I presented the evidence of the house sale, the secret accounts, the fake loan, and the ongoing manipulations. I made it clear that she had been dishonest from the start, that she'd been planning her escape for months, and that she had no right to claim half of what I built. Lisa's lawyer tried to argue that she was entitled to her share, citing some vague, marital contributions. But I shot that down with the facts. I explained how she'd sold the house behind my back, how she'd secretly taken out that loan without my knowledge, and how she'd been manipulating the legal process from day one. I saw her face flicker with anger and frustration as I laid it all out. She tried to interrupt, to spin her usual lies, but I kept going, showing the court every piece of evidence I had. The judge listened carefully, asking questions, and I could see that they weren't buying Lisa's bullshit. When I finally finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the judge announced that she would review all the evidence before making a decision. I felt a cautious sense of relief, but I knew this wasn't over yet. Lisa was already scheming behind the scenes, probably trying to find a way to turn the tables. After the court hearing, I felt drained but hopeful. I knew I'd done everything I could to expose her lies and protect my assets. I also knew that Lisa's pride was hurt. She'd been caught red-handed, and she wasn't going down without a fight. That night, I sat alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. I realized I'd been naive for so long, trusting her blindly. But I also learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. My mind kept circling around what was next. Would the court grant me full control of the estate? Would Lisa finally realize she couldn't manipulate her way out of this? Or was she planning something even more sinister? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. This was just the beginning of the final chapter, and I was ready to see it through. No matter what, I was determined to hold on to what I'd earned and to get some justice for myself and my family. The weeks that followed the court hearing were some of the most tense of my life. I kept waiting for her to make her move, to pull out some new trick or lie to try and turn the situation around. But surprisingly, she kept her head down, at least publicly. I could tell she was furious, probably trying to come up with some way to retaliate, but she was also cornered. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the court's decision was in my favor. They ordered her to return the money from the house sale, and they dismissed her claim to half of the estate based on her deception and manipulation. I spent the next few months rebuilding what I could and trying to move on. The house was gone, replaced by a new, modest place where I could focus on my kids and my business. I had to take a hard look at everything: my finances, my trust, my entire life. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it also made me realize I'd been too trusting, too naive. Lisa was a master at lying, and I'd let her manipulate me for years. But I also learned that sometimes you have to fight to protect what's yours, even if it means tearing everything apart first. Looking back, I see how much I grew through all of this. I learned to be more cautious about who I trust, about where I put my money, and about how I handle betrayal. I learned that even the most seemingly perfect relationships can hide dark secrets, and that sometimes the only way to survive is to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful it might be. I also learned that revenge isn't always about revenge, it's about justice, about making sure that the people who hurt you don't get away with it. Lisa's gone now. She moved out, probably to some other city, trying to start fresh after losing her grip on my life. I don't hate her anymore, I just feel sorry for her. Sorry that she let greed and lies consume her, that she betrayed everything we once had for a fleeting affair and a pile of stolen money. I've forgiven myself for trusting her for so long, and I've learned to forgive her too, in my own way. Because holding on to anger would only destroy me. If I had any advice for anyone reading this, especially those who might be going through something similar, it's this: trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep, but don't let it break you completely. Gather your evidence, stay calm, and fight for what's right. Sometimes the truth will come out and justice will be served. And in the end, you have to remember that your worth isn't defined by how others treat you, but by how you pick yourself up after they tear you down. I'm still healing. I still have scars, but I'm moving forward, stronger, wiser, and more cautious. I will never let someone manipulate me like that again. And I'll never forget what I learned from all of this, that even in the darkest moments, there's a chance to find your strength. You just have to be willing to fight for it.